This is Your Pain Game podcast, where we talk about the game of living in and with chronic pain and trauma, getting to the heart of how to heal. I am your host, Lyndsay Soprano. On this show, I plan on discussing with doctors, chronic pain patients, holistic practitioners, loved ones, and anybody that is interested in having their voice heard in the chronic pain and trauma world that we live in. I was a bully in the second half of my high school experience, and I was in a little crew of little bitches, and we bullied. And how nice of me, Lyndsay. I totally forgot that I was a bully, though. And in a nutshell, I went to 3 different high schools. My freshman year was challenging. I think everybody is challenged in their freshman year, but I had this crazy dude stalking me. And I had to be escorted to school by a police officer. It was scary and weird. And then after leaving there after my freshman year, I got accepted into a performing arts high school in Idlewild, California for their opera program. And so I was there and I got a little boyfriend. And shortly thereafter, he put me in the hospital after an evening of fun of beating me up along the way. After that lovely experience and also getting expelled from high school simultaneously, I ended up in a school in Southern California where my mom taught. And nothing's better than going to school with your mom, right? And during this time, and currently actually, I struggled with massive amounts of anxiety and depression and had safety issues, obviously, and it goes on. And I mention these at a high level because my life by 15 years old had already been fairly devastated, from sexual assault when I was 13 to being stalked to moving away from my childhood home to being beaten up and then having to walk into yet another high school. And that's just the nutshell, right? And I'm 15 years old and all of this has already happened. I don't know if any of that led me to being a bully. I don't know. There's no real excuse for that behavior from my perspective, but I do think that there is an element of that I have to keep in mind as I'm unpacking more and more by the day doing this show. I mean, I was a mean girl, man. I was a mean girl. I was part of the plastics, I wasn't Regina George, but I certainly was a close second. And, bullying comes from so many different places in our lives. And then we've got the onslaught of social media, right? God, I'm so glad that we were not in high school when with social media. I don't know what would have happened to me. Yeah, I mean, I feel like with social media, bullying is even worse than it was for us when we were kids. And I feel terrible about the bullying that I had done. But if there's anyone listening that I did bully, I would really like you to call me out. And literally, I want to know, because I want to know how I've affected other people that they might be struggling with. Who knows, And my guest today has some insight on how bullying has actually helped him in his life. And it's a kind of an interesting twist to it when he says, I'm grateful for being bullied. I was like, what? So, and he's turned into this incredible, strong, persevering leader that we could all learn a lot from, especially when it comes to overcoming anxiety and fear like a badass. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Vin Infante. Hey, babe, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So he is a former New York firefighter. And ladies, settle down. I know you can look at him too at another time. And has had firsthand experience with the importance of having a resilient mindset. He has developed a unique hybrid service that combines aspects of therapy, mentoring, and coaching to help people and leadership teams break through their mindset barriers. And I love that, breaking through mindset barriers, because man, oh man, do we fight with our mind, especially people that deal with anxiety like Vin and I both have. So let's talk about, since we've started talking about the bullying aspect, I'd really like to just tiptoe on that a little bit, and then we can get going on the rest of the episode with you.
I love it. So before we start, though, I have so many thoughts come up, but 2 of them that came up was, one, I feel like it reminds me of Lindsay Lohan. I don't know why. And then number 2
is my name is Lyndsay.
Yeah, you honestly look a little like her. I could give it to you. I think that's the biggest part. It's I'm seeing it in the Mean Girls vibe. And then the other part was I wanted to jump on this podcast and say, yes, you bullied me. I remember you calling me a fugly bitch in the burn bar. No, just
Can you imagine if I get some girl from high school that's like, oh my God, I have been in therapy for like 20 years because of you? I would be devastated. I would, because it's so sad. In fact, my little nephew was bullied this past week at school for being a little overweight, and he beat the crap out of the kid. That's now, right now. That happened this week. I know. Poor guy. So anyways, Lyndsay Lohan, Lyndsay Soprano, whatever.
I love it. I love it all. So let's jump into the story. So I had been bullied my whole life. And it was interesting because as I got older, I actually started realizing that it started way sooner than I even remember, right? I was the dog when we would play house in like kindergarten, first grade, and I'd be like, oh, can I play? And they'd be like, yeah, you can be the dog. Go lay over there. I was like, well, what do I say? Nothing. Just go lay there. Like, right. And so I was thinking about that later as I got older. I was like, wait, was I ever accepted by anyone? and I thought more and more about it. And there's like moments that I could pick out that were probably most significant. So I'll share a few of them because they're kind of funny now, but they sucked in the moment. So like when I was in fifth grade, for instance, I remember I went over this kid's house for a sleepover, and I woke up in the morning and there was just all like half-eaten food and knocked over bottles and stuff surrounding me. And everybody was making pretend I woke up in the middle of the night and ate everything in the house, which you would think is like relatively innocent, right? But as a kid who never really feels like he fits in and is always trying to gain everyone's approval, that would make you feel uncomfortable when there's like 8 to 10 kids pointing at you and laughing at you. And
for sure.
So then I remember I kind of walked away to try and like recover my nerves. And then I came back and my sleeping bag was full of shaving cream. And so after that, I just kind of lost it. I like cried and I called my mom to come get me. Right. And that's okay. So that's like in the early years. Then you go into middle school, and I was bullied in a few ways. I got thrown down the steps by this one kid who was a pretty relentless bully. And then I told the dean that, this situation happened. And I told the dean, hey, like, this kid threw me down the steps. And he goes, well, what happened? I said, well, I started taking karate. So I was trying to build confidence in myself and trying to learn how to defend myself. And my sensei was like, hey, you got to stand up for yourself more. You can't just let people push you around. So I was like, okay. So he said, when somebody tells you to do something that you don't feel good about, he's like, stand up. And, that was maybe probably not the best advice as for a little wimpy to have, right? So there's this big kid who I still doubt to this day was actually a sixth grader. And he's like, move it, idiot. And I'm like, I'll move when I'm ready. And he's like, what'd you say? I was like, I said, I'll move when I'm ready. And he's like, no, you go now. And he threw me down the steps. So I told this story to the dean. And then when we went to the principal, because, obviously I was hurt, so I had to check in with someone. So when we went to the principal, the dean turned it around and blamed me. And he goes, this guy started taking karate, thinks he's a tough guy, and started a fight with that kid. And so he didn't get in trouble. I kind of got in trouble. And so now it's like one of those things where, like, in the movies where nobody believes the kid, it really was like that. I was like, so I'm never going back to that dean. And two, it was already established that I was the problem and I caused the fight and I caused the trouble. So if this kid does anything to me, it's going to be, well, what did he do? Right. And it was just one of those things that I was like, okay, now I can't even talk to the adults. And I shied away from that. And in high school, it was probably at the peak. I was getting thrown into trash cans, like having my feet kind of fly up in the air. It's pretty ridiculous, actually, thinking about it now. And
it's like a cartoon character.
Yes, like in those movies where you're like, this is absurd. Who does this? And it's like, oh, they do actually do this. They do it to me. And so there was that. And oh my God, I left one out from the middle school. This was funny. So there was this girl that I had a mega crush on. And I'm not going to say her name because God forbid she ever listens.
Lyndsay Lohan?
No, it wasn't. I mean, if she was in my middle school, I might have tried to become cooler. But anyway, this girl, I was super interested in. I had a major crush on her. And I remember she walked up to me one time in the middle of the schoolyard, and like this was recess, so all the kids were outside. She walked up to me and was like, oh, hi. And she goes, hey, I think you're really cute. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, you're Vin. I was like, really? She was like, yes. I was like shocked she knew my name. I was like, you know my name? Fuck. Okay. And she's like, yeah, you look really cute. And I think, she's like, I think your pants are really cute. I was like, my pants? She's like, yeah, and I think they look better on the ground. And she fucking pants me in the schoolyard.
Oh man, Lindsay Lohan for the win. Oh man. Oh, Lindsay's, we are just such a pain in the ass, aren't we? Wow.
It's
Okay. Well,
terrible.
and it sounds so silly, like that we're as adults remembering those things so incredibly vivid.
Yeah.
And how that does affect our anxiety and how it affects our well-being and how we feel about ourselves, and how that it seems so silly that that would be something that would cause any form of trauma, but it does. And we just have to be so cognizant of it with our children. I know you have a fairly new little one in your life. I don't have children, but I've got nieces and nephews, and we have to really wrap our minds around like this bully culture and really help to give these kids more confidence in life. I mean, that's just, and to get these bullies out of here, man. But you're talking about having been grateful for being bullied. So I kind of want to segue into that because that was an interesting turn of events when you told that to me.
Sure. Well, I've come to believe that your pain is your potential. That pain is there because we need adversity in our life. We need something that we can really utilize to help us grow. I've never met anyone who's been successful, who's achieved a lot, who's been wise, who's been strong, who hasn't already overcome pain, because they develop that in those moments. They develop that in the moments where you are forced to look at things a different way. Because if you look at things the same way, you never grow, right? So if I have to sit there and figure out, okay, I got pants, then unfortunately on this day, I was wearing tighty whities. What do I need to learn? No more tighty whities, right? So
Please, God, no, we hate them. Stop wearing them.
I was 11. Leave me alone. My mom
See, here I
still
am
bought my
bullying you.
clothes. Can't believe I have to defend my 11-year-old self from you right now.
Am I going to hear from you from 20 years from now that you've been in therapy because of this episode?
No, I'm already grateful for this. Don't worry about
it. Good. Me too, babe.
And so I've come to learn that one of the best things about all of this, and the way I developed the gratitude from it. So this has been a question, and why I love telling my story so much is because I feel every time I tell the story, it actually changes, which is funny, but not in a bad way. What changes is the way I, one, feel about it, and two, how I think about it. Because as you continue to talk about it, at least for me, it becomes less and less powerful, because every time I think about it, I continue to reflect on it, right? So I don't believe in just rehashing something to rehash it. I believe in talking about things for perspective and power and shifts, and finding a way to use it to work for you instead of against you. That's how I've lived my entire life. And so I'll go through it, but I know I always come out the other side with a better perspective. And as I told my story of being bullied so many times, there was this one podcast that I'll never forget. I was on there and she asked me the same question. She's like, so how do you feel now after being bullied? I'm like, well, I feel good about it. I understand, like, the people who bullied me, they had so much of their own stuff probably going on in their life that it's more that they were upset. And I, unfortunately, was the target. They didn't bully me because I was Vin. They bullied me because their life had something that wasn't great in it. And I was the one that they chose. But if you took me and put me somewhere else and just put somebody else in my spot, they would have got bullied too, which means it's not a personal problem. It's a personal problem to them, not for me. So as I was explaining that, something like flooded into my mind. Moments of grace, like where God or the universe just pours into you to give you something. And that's exactly what it was. And I said, but wait, I have one more thing I want to say about this. Like, and this is actually the first time I've ever thought of this. So you're hearing something new. I said, I've come to realize that I'm actually grateful it happened to me, not just because of the perspective that I've gained or the strength that I've developed, but I'm grateful it happened to me because you hear all of these times that there are these sad stories of these kids who can't hack it and they can't take it and that it's too hard for them and they wind up taking their own lives. I'm grateful it happened to me because I'm still here. Not only am I still here, I'm inspiring others. I'm helping others. I'm helping others become more powerful. I dealt with it. I became better. I never became bitter. And you know what? If it was given to someone else, they might not still be here. So I'm grateful it was given to me because I am capable of handling it. And I am consistently becoming better because of it.
Yeah, hard stop. You totally are. And I think that's really wise to say because and I'll take it separating from the bully side, but for me with what my diagnosis is with my CRPS and stuff, I have chosen to, and I've been through a lot of shit. I mean, listen to the opening of that and that's just like scratching the surface of the things that have happened. But with what's happened to me from a diagnosis or what's come into my life, I have chosen to, and I wasn't always here in this place that I am now. But through this process of actually creating the show and doing what I'm doing, I have looked at what I have been dealt with as a blessing and not a curse because I'm getting to meet incredible people like yourself. I'm opening up my mind to other ideas that about ways that I can help heal and how I can help heal other people through what we're doing right now. Because there's somebody right now that will listen to this and will be like, oh my God, my son's being bullied. Well, hey, my sister for crying out loud, right? Like my nephew, like that message needs to be loud and clear to him right now that it isn't about him at all. And you're right, because when I think about it, while you were talking about why I bullied, that's probably exactly why there was so much that was going on in my life that it was so chaotic and so fearful and so unsafe and so anxious. And I was older than my age from the time I was 13, and it was like, I took it out on the wrong person. This poor person, there's one girl in particular that I remember what we did to her and it was just terrible. And I was thinking about it last night. I was all wound up. I was like, I can't believe how incredibly vibrant these memories came back to me last night when I was kind of prepping for us to talk today. And I just feel awful. And I'm the only one out of that group of plastics of our mean girls that actually ended up confessing of what we did, how we did it, where we did it, why we did it. And I went to her family, I went to her parents, I went to her and apologized. But the rest of the crew didn't. And they got mad at me because we all got in trouble. And I'm like, well, okay. I'm going to take like inventory of myself at 15 years old right now, or 16. I was 16 at the time. I remember because I was driving my Volkswagen bus and that's where all of the shenanigans began. So, but it's a great message, it is that you really are stronger and better for it. And it's almost like, thank you. Thanks, bully.
Yeah.
In your case, it really worked out well for you. And I hope that we can start teaching some of the youngers in our life that we can use these challenges that we're faced with to become better and stronger people, to persevere through what life hands us, because life isn't easy, No.
But that's the funny thing, right? Like life isn't supposed to be easy. I think I've heard this before and I like to echo it because it's so important. The biggest problem that some people have is that they believe they shouldn't have any problems. You see, problems are the things that actually give our life meaning. If we had no problems, life wouldn't have meaning. Life and the meaning is all created in the problems we experience because your problems are actually a privilege based on the life you're going to experience. Now, they could be a privilege or not, depending on, you and I, for instance. We're very fortunate. Our problems are going to be very different than where do I get my next meal? Am I going to have a home tonight? Right? But we have different problems. Mine might be, how do I grow my business? Yours might be, how do I
get my ass out of a wheelchair?
Yeah. How do I get my ass out of the wheelchair today? And here's the thing, right? There's somebody who's like, how the hell do I even get a wheelchair? How can I even afford one? And there's somebody like, how the hell do I even start a business? I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to scale. They're trying to figure out how to start one. Then there's somebody trying to figure out how to get a job. Then there's somebody trying to figure out if they're even going to have food tomorrow. And the problems that we have are going to everyone has problems. It's just defined differently based on the stage of life or where you're at. And so I think that's another thing too, is that as we become higher performing people, some of us start getting into this space. And I've dealt a lot with this with a lot of my clients because they're all high performers, right? Is they almost feel guilty for having problems. And I'm like, that's bullshit. How dare you minimize your issues? Just because you make $1 million does not mean you don't have problems. Just because your company is doing good doesn't mean you don't have problems. Just because you are in a relationship doesn't mean you don't have problems. And when you focus on what you don't have instead of what you do have, that's actually where a lot of the problems start. Because there's nothing wrong with having a problem. The problem is, how do you think about it? What do you focus on? What are you doing with it? Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to become creative? Are you trying to act different? Are you trying to solve it? And this is a really fun one. I like to tell people we don't actually fix problems. You can't fix a problem. It's impossible. What you can do is you could outgrow it.
I like that.
Yeah, you have to outgrow it, but outgrowing is it could mean anything. You have a new piece of knowledge. You change something in maybe in your diet or your physical life or your mental or your emotional. It always requires you learning something and becoming more than you currently are. That's how we overcome problems. So problems in and of themselves, potential for growth. So your pain is your potential.
It is my potential. And pain doesn't have to be painful, right?
Right.
Because that's one of the things that I do. Because every morning I wake up and it is an absolute freaking cognitive decision that I have to make every morning to put my feet on the floor because I hurt so bad. But here I am. I'm more than halfway through my day and I've been killing it. And I am proud of that. The only way out is through, right? And so you get through the fear. And I want to talk a little bit about, you had mentioned about some of the things that like fear responses and how we do that. What we respond out of fear. And I know in places in my life where I have done that. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think that's a really good message to talk about our fear responses.
Sure. So every response, interestingly enough, whether it's fear, depression, anxiety, these all are there in some way, shape, or form to actually help us. One of the biggest problems is that people don't know that. And I say that's one of the biggest problems because if you think something is bad and you think it's there to hurt you, how do you think you're going to respond to it? Probably not too well, right? You can't change the way you're responding to something if you believe it to be a specific thing, right? Certainty is most people's biggest problem, that they are certain that X means Y and there is no other possibility. What if X equals Z instead? In fact, what if you've been wrong about X most of your life and you don't even know? And X isn't actually X, it's A, and you've been screwing up the letter the whole time. There's so much potential to look at. How can we change these things? So when we talk about a fear response hasn't actually changed much since our ancient ancestors. So what does that mean? Well, at one point, the fear response would tell our Neanderthal cousins to run away from saber-toothed tigers because it's going to kill you. That's when it started. Guess what?
Right.
It's still doing the same damn thing thousands of years later, or millions of years, or whatever you guys believe out there. It's still doing the thing all this time later. How's that? It's never really changed. The reality is these responses are coming from, we have a belief that something is going to threaten us. And we get into that three-pronged state, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. There's only three options once we perceive a threat. Now, what's so problematic about this is it activates the nervous system. It pumps the adrenal glands. It shuts down a lot of functioning in the body. And it actually forces you into a tunnel vision. So it's like you can only see right in front of you, there's this massive lion, but you can't see that there's doors to the left and the right, and there's a window you could jump out. Oh, and if you just kind of do this, you'll notice the lion's not even freaking real. It's just a cutout. So it does this hyper focus thing where all you can do is see the threat, which gets you more and more wound up. So what we have to actively do is we have to actively learn, okay, one, something I'm perceiving in the environment is threatening me with a potential. And this is how crazy it is, right? The potential to kill me.
Right, yeah.
Right. There's really not much that does that nowadays, right? So it's like, oh, I'm having an anxiety attack. You really believe something's going to kill you right now? Like, it's like, what's going to kill you? We're sitting in an office talking.
That's a really good point.
Right? It's so interesting.
Shit.
And so that's what we want to really look at and identify. And this is where a lot of consciousness comes in. 95% of everything we do is done in our subconscious mind. That is everything being our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our experiences, our behaviors, our actions. It's all subconscious. Even the language you use to describe things. How crazy is that? 95% of everything you do every single day is a repeat from the day before. That, mind you, 95 is the average. Because they even found that some people were as programmed as 99% of their day is the exact same. And on the lower or maybe the higher functioning scale, people were as low as like 90% of their day was subconscious. So it's one of those things where if you are not consciously and constantly building this awareness, you are very prone to keep experiencing the same things day in and day out. You're very prone to these same patterns and familiar feelings and thoughts and languages. And so when we're having anxiety responses or these fear responses, it's to say you need to pause and you have to actually think. Like, it's one thing you have to, yes, calm your body. That's important. But you also have to really dig and understand what the heck is creating this. Because there's no such thing as anxiety out of nowhere. That's not possible. It's just not real. So what it actually means is that there's something in the environment that you're so unaware of because it's now just deeply patterned. But your body is aware of it because the subconscious is always on. And now you're picking it up, you're perceiving it, and you're having a response. So just to tie that point in for your listeners, I will give a quick example. Let's say when you were young, you were threatened with, like, your father would, like, pick up a knife and, like, pretend like he was going to stab you. You're scared shitless, right? I know. Has to be a very clear representation for your listeners. So this is like a thing that happened in your childhood, right? Now you're in your 30s. It was somewhat worked out, but not really, right? And you're out at a restaurant and you're eating dinner and you're starting to have an anxiety. You're like, I don't know where this is coming from. There's no reason. I'm just sitting here trying to eat this little biscuit that they gave us. Why am I having anxiety right now? I can't figure it out. And of course you can. But 3 tables down, somebody was joking around and he grabbed a butter knife and you were ooh, like this. And you weren't even aware, but you caught it out the side of your eye in the peripheral. And that is triggering a threat response in you because it hasn't been worked out yet. It hasn't been cautioned or caught yet. And you haven't digged in and figured out, oh, that's what it is. So now you can't even bring yourself to a state of calmness because you can't even rationalize, like, oh, is the idiot with the butter knife. So yeah. I want people to kind of think about this. Like, there's no such thing as a fear of the unknown. There's no such thing as anxiety out of nowhere. It's not that broad. And if you could really take this in and truly understand what I'm saying, is you will gain so much more power over your anxiety.
I love that because, as we've talked about previously, and I talked about it on previous episodes, of course, my anxiety has always been talk about fight or flight. Well, my body lives in that constant fight or flight with my CRPS stuff too. Mm-hmm. And that subconscious, it's so interesting that you say these things because it is true. Like, I'm just sitting here thinking about how many times my anxiety, and I know exactly when it happens. I know exactly how I feel. And I've started to get better about being able to go, okay, Lyndsay, take a beat. You're not Lindsay Lohan. Anxiety ridden number 1. It's out the door.
I feel like that's a good thing. Why are we going back to this as the negative?
I don't know. No, anyway. So, no, Lyndsay, like, what's going on with you? Like, why all of the sudden, take some inventory really quick. And 95% of the time, it's something so stupid. It's like, why did my heart, like, I get clammy, my heart starts racing, I get hot. I'm like, I feel out of control. I'm like, I have to clean something immediately or I have to organize something immediately. That's why my house is immaculate and everything's organized because I live in such anxiety. But the anxiety is so, we put so much attention on anxiety that it gives me anxiety, right? Because that's just like what our culture is doing to us. And I like the idea of the whole, like, running from a saber-toothed tiger, because that's totally how, like, really bad anxiety feels. My best friend on the planet last night calls me and she's like, I'm on my way to urgent care. I think I'm having a heart attack. And I'm like, what? Okay. What's happening? Anxiety. She was just having a massive anxiety panic attack and she's never had one before. And so I understand where she's at. And I'm like, okay, you go and you get any test that you do that will help curb your enthusiasm on the anxiety side of it. Right. But when it comes down to it, I can speak wholeheartedly and openly about the fact that it is, I don't know if it's a weakness of mine, but it is something that is prevalent in my day to day. And that's one of the reasons why I love having you on today, is because of we're very similar in a lot of our background and some of the things that we did in self-harm and all of that to get through some of the things that we were going through as kids and as young adults. And, you know, some of that, like, creeps up and all of a sudden is like, oh, why is that giving me anxiety from 10 years ago or something? You know, it's terrible. It's a terrible feeling. And I get it, but I like that you've got positivity behind it and that it kind of squashed this whole culture that we have of almost embracing anxiety instead of going, dude, it's this big of a problem and you're making it this big of a problem. You guys can't see my hands, but he can. So that's all that matters right now. So you work with all these high performing and these leadership teams and all of this. What do you do with them in regards to the fear responses? What do you do in regards to helping them shift their focus? What do you do with these people to give them their moment in the mirror?
I just tell them to stop it.
Episode over. Thank you for your $1,200 fee. Just knock it off, would you?
It's like Dr.
It was
Phil.
nice talking to you, Vin. Thanks so much.
So what I do with these guys and girls is we spend time building a lot of conscious awareness, because that's really what it comes down to. Are you afraid of something that you know or something you don't know? Well, it could be both, actually, right? So when we say, okay, is it a fear of the unknown? Well, I already said there's no such thing as a fear of the unknown. So is it possible to be afraid of something you don't know? Yes, but also no. And I'll explain, because that probably confused people. It's possible to be afraid of something you don't know, because what happens is the brain will make up an unlimited amount of reasons why you should be scared. But that right there is actually a knowing. You've created the answer before it could happen. So it's not a fear of the unknown, but it is a fear of the known that you've created, if that makes sense, right? That's where we
totally
get
makes sense. Yeah.
This anxiety of the future. It's like, well, what if I public speak and I piss my pants? Well, did you actually speak yet? So why are you seeing that as a scenario? Why is this the thing on the forefront of your brain? And why are you creating that imagery? Because imagery is also very powerful. And so if that's the image that you build in your mind and that's the image you have in your head, of course you're afraid of public speaking. You're afraid of the unknown of it. But you've already created the scenario. So what you're actually afraid of is what you're thinking happening. And so that's the quote unquote fear of the future, fear of the unknown, which, by the way, doesn't exist. And then when we look back at the past, it's more about, okay, what was triggering responses in you in your past? What was it that was coming up for you in the past that elicited these responses? Now, if you've heard this before, you're going to like it. It's neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you had a moment in your past that was extremely significant and all the factors of your body were involved, let's say there was touch, there was smell, there was sight, right? There was hearing, there was an emotional component, there was a physiological component. There was you did something with your voice, you got your vocal cords involved. We have like 7-8 different components right there, right? All of those components are neurons that are going to fire, and now they're going to wire together. So now you have all these components and they're all going off at once. That is going to create a very strong response. For instance, you probably had in passing, maybe in your past or even present, a friend or someone tried to scare you. Why you don't continuously have that scare response every time you turn a corner is because of the fact that it wasn't nearly significant enough. There's probably only 1 or 2 neurons that went off, right? It was like, oh, it was just my friend being an idiot. However, something truly traumatic where you are actually heavily emotionally invested in it because of how strong it was. There was a physiological component, all these other things. The space, the area will remind you of it. The song that played in the background could remind you of it. And it's because there was so much firing and wiring in that moment, as opposed to the scare from your friend around the corner, that it stays and remains. So now it's really about stripping away and understanding, why are all these neurons firing? Like what was happening, and starting to break that down and then replacing it with a new pattern or habit. Because you can't replace you can't get rid of a habit with nothing. It's impossible. It's like, oh, I'm going to, for instance, Lyndsay, if I were to ask you, hey, what is this? You're going to tell me what?
I would say it's a pen.
Yes, it is a pen.
He's holding up a pen. He's holding up a pen.
I'm holding up a pen. So I'm holding up this pen, right? And I'm asking Lyndsay what it is. And she says it's a pen. So now if I go, Lyndsay, this is not a pen. Please tell me what it is. What would your answer be?
It's still a pen.
It's still a pen. But if I gave you something else and I said, this isn't a pen, this is a pencil. It's a pencil, it's a pencil, it's a pencil. I want you to always identify and remember this as a pencil. It's going to be a little bit easier for me to come up and say, what is this? And you'll be like, well, it's a pencil. Right. Because we replaced one piece of knowledge with another. But because I didn't give you a new reference point, right? Because I didn't give you a new reference point before when I said it's not a pen, tell me what it is. You're like, no, it's definitely a pen. because you weren't given new evidence, new information, or a new possibility to hold on to. Thus, you are 100% going back to your default program. And I know that's a stupid example, but I feel like it's the easiest one to explain it in
It's a
simple terms.
totally stupid example.
I know.
Here,
You know
I'll
what?
give you one. I've got one, babe. It could be a pen. I think about this. In fact, I was just on the phone with a future guest in regards to addiction. And I think that one of the things that you talk about in regards to, this may be a better example for you for later episodes with other people. No, but you take the alcohol away, right? They still need to go grab for something. What am I going to drink? What am I going to do here? What, like, replace it with water? What? I'm not replacing it with water. Like, those kinds of things. It totally makes sense for addictions. It makes sense for food. It makes sense for all of those things where you can't just quit something without replacing that habitual thing that you do, whatever it is. Biting your nails. Okay, chew on some carrot sticks instead. Stop smoking, put a celery stick between your fingers, like blah, 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 blah. There's all these different tools that you can use to break free from some of those things that we do that are harmful for ourselves, or might not necessarily be harmful, but it's a change that we need to make in our lives. So we don't have this open space that isn't filled, because I think that's a lot, especially when it comes to addiction. I think that's a lot of where it's like, well, what am I going to do on Friday night now? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? There's nothing to do without a glass of wine in my hand or whatever, and I think that that's a challenge, and it's fear-based for sure. I mean, I'm speaking from experience to a certain extent in that, it's like, oh, it's scary to make changes. It's scary to like go, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to do a 5K in a wheelchair this year instead of on my feet. Like, that's a replacement that I'm doing on March 18th of 2023, right? Like, I'm doing my first 5K in a chair. That is weird, but it's replacing an element of my life with something positive that I have to start integrating into my world, right? I had to replace walking with a wheelchair. But it's similar in nature, It doesn't have to be this big, huge thing, but small changes make big results,
I agree. I mean, it's not ginormous changes that get us to the end result, right? It's a culmination of all the little things you've done to get you to that big result. Because there's a few pieces in there. It's like one with the neurology, for instance, all those little squiggly grooves in your brain, those are actually all patterns. And so if you want to get rid of one groove, you need to create another, because it's kind of like putting a sheet on the bed, right? The sheet is kind of crunched up. When you spread it, then it becomes flat, and then you can crunch another part. And so that's where it's like, that's how you start working out that issue in the brain, right? You want to get rid of this pattern. You got to start creating another groove so that one's pulled tight and flattened out. And that's a lot harder than people imagine sometimes. And it also has another part too, with like what you were talking about with addiction. I've come to understand a big part of addiction is the narrowing of what brings us pleasure in life. And that's why we get addicted to certain things, because there's so much emotional, positive value in it. Even if it's destroying our life, our body, our brain, we function out of these three core fundamental principles: moving away from pain, chasing pleasure, right? Seeking it out, and conserving energy. So a lot of the times addiction fills that, right? Like, would you rather go out and have sex, or would you rather go and masturbate? And if you get caught in the masturbation part, you're going to constantly do it over and over and over, because it does all three, right? Well, it's hard to find a partner sometimes. It's very easy. I know exactly what I like. And then, of course, it conserves energy, and I could go right back to watching TV or playing video games or eating. I don't even have to leave the house. This is great. We grow addicted to things that move us so much quicker towards pleasure, with so much less pain and so much less effort. And so we'll constantly do that, even with mental emotional states. For some people, anxiety is so familiar that it's so much easier and more comfortable, even though it provides a negative result. It's easier and more comfortable than the idea that I'm going to tell you, you have to think positive and focus on the good things that'll happen. You're going to be like, that sounds ridiculous. It's too hard. I don't even know what that's like. I already know what anxiety is like. I'm pretty comfortable. This is my emotional home. It's beautiful. It's got a nice little doormat outside. Please wipe your feet and come on in and join me in my anxious emotional home here. And so it's so wild how like we have these things that we don't even know how to work out.
But welcome into my anxiety-ridden home. And you just made just even saying that made me take aback, because it's probably pretty anxious for people to come into my home sometimes, because I am so riled up about everything being perfect and everything being just so. And the OCD in me, which is how I go through my anxiety, is cleaning and organizing and, all of that stuff. And how it's probably hard on other people being like, oh God, I don't even know if we could like sit down. Like, what if we scrunch your blanket wrong? Like that's not cool. And that's something that I definitely need to think about. I mean, I'm really trying hard to work through anxiety in a much better way than I used to. But I'm just scratching the surface on it. And that's why I think it's such an important topic to talk about. So what I'd like to do is, well, first of all, thank you for being here with us today and for talking about this stuff, because it's so incredibly important. And it's good for the parents to listen to about bullying. It's good for people that have been bullied there. And I'm really grateful for you being here today. So thank you for that. What would you like to leave our listeners with here? Like, what's your big go-to for you?
My big go-to is that, I started changing my life, and I wish I knew this sooner, but I started changing my life when I stopped giving away my power. And giving away your power is when you're focused on anything you can't control, right? So I'm focused on the kid being a jerk. I'm focused on the bullies. I'm focused on this. I'm focused on that. I can't do anything about those kids. I can only conduct myself, and I can only focus on my life, and I can only focus on how I want to focus and what I want to focus on. And so what I've come to learn is that the switch really took place and the transformation started occurring in my life when I was like, you know what? Everything that's happened has happened. Everything that will continue to happen or will happen in the future can be determined by me making more conscious effort and more conscious choices today. Like when I had this turnaround at 23 years old, I was like, the last 15 or so years kind of sucked, but the next 15 don't have to. In fact, the next 15 minutes don't have to. I'm going to decide right here, right now, who do I want to be? And I'm going to start stepping more into that. And I'm going to step more into alignment. And I'm going to really become someone I'm proud of being. Not even someone other people are proud of, just someone I could be proud of. And that's not always easy. And it's definitely not easy to see when you're getting bullied and you're going through all this other crap. But I think when you really put in that effort to like ask the hard question, who do you want to be? And then what does that person need to do to be that person? And you start doing it. Now you're just living it. And you're not faking it till you make it. You're believing it until you become it. That's probably the more beautiful thing to try. So the closing word is this. I know. Lyndsay is shocked right now. You should have seen how big her eyes got. But the closing word is this. I've been ending a lot of my engagements with this quote because honestly, it really changed my life. And it was a quote by Aristotle. And he says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit." And so if you identify who you want to become every day, look at what are the habits you need to have to be that person and just repeat it. And you might not know when, and you may not feel it right away, but eventually you will be living in your greatest form and excellence will show up in your life.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, show up the way that you want to every day, and each day just a little chip away at it, and then it's like, oh, wow, all of these things that I've been doing actually got me an amazing result. That's so awesome. And I'm so glad that you have done all of that and you are where you are and that you are who you are and that we got to meet each other because it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So where can we find you?
Everyone can find me. Instagram is probably my most relevant platform. It's Vin.Infante. I post reels every single day with tons of free insight and infos. You can find me on my website, www.vincentinfante.life. There's a free resource on there for anyone who wants it. Yeah, LinkedIn, TikTok, all the tweeting, Twitter, all that good stuff. You guys,
all the tweeters.
All the tweeters.
My God. I'll put all of his tweeter information up for you guys in social media as well and show notes on the website as well. Thank you so much for your time with us today. I really appreciate it. This has been fun. Oh my gosh, it's been totally fun, which is what I expected this episode to be like. Actually, I was like, what are we two little shenanigans are we going to get into? So thanks for having a good sense of humor with me today, because that's part of why I'm doing the show too, is because I like to bring some light and some happiness and some vulnerability and some fun into what we're doing here. Even though we're talking about some topics that can be a little bit of a pain game, So you are exclusively invited to share this VI pain journey together. Let's get to the heart of how to heal with you by my side. Please follow the Pain Game podcast wherever you digest your podcast content. We will be there. Visit us at thepaingamepodcast.com and follow us on all the socials. Thanks for listening, my little VIPs. Catch you on the other side.